but cerebral core is a little bit different than brain core. Brain core is neurofeedback, and cerebral core isn't neurofeedback. Cerebral core is something I developed because my mom was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. And she was diagnosed with Alzheimer's about 4 years ago, 5 years ago. Before that, we had noticed certain things, maybe for 8 to 10 years prior to her actual diagnosis, that didn't seem right. You know, she would forget things that she normally wouldn't forget. And at that time, I didn't know what that was. We had taken her to the doctor. Doctor said, no, she's fine, she's fine. And then all of a sudden one day, no, she's got dementia well, they called it Alzheimer's. Now they think it's dementia. But, you know, all of a sudden one day that was there. And so I started really thinking to myself, gosh, I wonder if we could have done anything before the Alzheimer's was diagnosed. In other words, when we first started noticing those symptoms, when we first started noticing the subjective descriptions that she was giving us, like, for instance, it's one thing to forget your keys, but it's another thing to forget what your keys are used for. She would forget to write certain dates down. She was working for me at the time. And so I started thinking to myself, I wonder if there was anything we could have done. So I started doing my research. And of course, the first thing I researched was Alzheimer's, and I was looking at all the different things about Alzheimer's. And I was amazed to find out that about 500,000 people each year are diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's, which is Alzheimer's before 65. But one of the things I discovered was that the data was starting to suggest that the true symptoms of Alzheimer's actually start about 20 to 30 years before the first symptoms appear. And it's also been shown that it is during that time that we can make a difference, and we could perhaps either prolong or delay the onset of Alzheimer's, or maybe even just eliminate it altogether. In any instance, it's during that time that we all should be concerned about optimizing our brain. We need to do things that optimize our brain, because the stronger our brain is as we go into those later years, the better chance we have of preserving our cognitive faculties. And so this idea of 20 to 30 years before the first symptom started to really grow on me, and I started to do more research, and I found a paper that was actually put out by the CDC in 2018, where the name of the paper is called Subjective Cognitive Decline, a Public Health Issue. And they define subjective cognitive decline as the self-reported experience of worsening or more frequent confusion or memory loss. And they also describe it as a cognitive impairment. Now, this is exactly what my mom was experiencing in the early years, and before she was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. And the thing that really got me was in the paper, it actually says that this is now considered to be the earliest noticeable symptom of Alzheimer's. And the risk for mild cognitive impairment and dementia is increased in individuals that suffer with subjective cognitive decline. So it was like a spark went off in my head, and I said, oh, that's exactly what my mom had. And now I know that there are things that we could have done back then that maybe would have delayed the onset of this, or maybe even prevented it altogether. So that's where the whole spark for CerebroCore came from. I continued doing my research, and the first question I had was, well, how do you identify this thing? How do you identify subjective cognitive decline? And everything I read was basically saying that it's something that is identified by a person complaining about worsening cognitive symptoms, but yet the cognitive assessments don't show anything that would indicate Alzheimer's or dementia. So that was really what I was focusing on. And then I came across an article, it was a research paper that identified a questionnaire that can be used to, once again, identify subjective cognitive decline, which, as we've already said, is the first noticeable symptom of Alzheimer's. So this questionnaire, it's 24 questions, and part of that, or the entire questionnaire actually, we created a digital version of that. So the questionnaire is something that was used in Alzheimer's research, and it was a piece of paper the person filled out We made it into a digital version, and it's available to the general public free of charge. At our CerebroCore website, cerebrocoreusa.com, there's what we call a quick cog assessment, and this is a digital version of the questionnaire that is used in Alzheimer's research studies to identify subjective cognitive disorder. So this subjective cognitive disorder or decline is going to be identified with this questionnaire. And after you finish taking the questionnaire, it really doesn't take long to go through the 24 questions. You're going to be placed into a low risk, moderate risk, or high risk for subjective cognitive decline.
What are some examples of some of those questions in the subjective questionnaire?
So things like, they find it harder to learn new telephone numbers. They can't find their personal possessions. Sometimes when you're talking to them about a movie, like you'll say, "Hey, yeah, did you see that movie or that TV show?" They can't really describe the plot very well. They tend to forget doctor's appointments, or if you're talking to them about something like a recent family event, they don't remember the details of that recent family event. Recent news, famous people's names. They have a hard time placing names, so they're always thinking about what name or even sometimes what word to use. Another question was, I find it harder to start conversations, yes or no. Things like that. Those are the things that we ask in that questionnaire. And there's 24 questions, and they're yes or no answers. That's all they are. And then based on the number of yeses and the number of nos, we can actually put you into one of those risk categories.